Welcome students. The topic of deliberation is gap model of service quality. This model helps the service provider to understand the deviation in service delivery from the expectations of customer. Let's get into the details of this popular and very intensive model. The central focus of the gaps model is the customer gap, which is the difference between customer's expectations and his perceptions of service performance. For delivering quality services, marketer need to understand the causes behind this gap to plug the customer gap. There can be any or all of the four provider gaps as the underlying causes behind the customer gap. These gaps are namely: Gap 1, the listening gap. Gap 2, the service designs and standards gap. Gap 3, service performance gap. Gap 4, the communication gap. Let's first explain the provider gap number 1, which is also called the listening gap. The key factors leading to provider gap number 1 are: insufficient marketing research, insufficient upward communication, focus on transactions, inadequate service recovery. Now comes provider gap number 2, also known as service design and standards gap. The reasons responsible for this gap are usually poor service design, unsystematic new service development, absence of process management, failure to develop tangibles, faulty servicescape design. The service performance gap is known as the third provider gap. Key factors leading to provider gap 3 are: ineffective recruitment, role ambiguity and role conflict, untrained customers, problems with service intermediaries, failure to match supply and demand. The fourth provider gap, which can be the reason of customer gap, could be the communication gap. The key factors leading to provider gap 4 are: lack of integrated marketing communication mix, overpromising by the salesperson or provider, unmanaged customer expectations, inadequate horizontal communications. We have studied all the gaps in the gaps model of quality. Now we should understand the generic prescriptions for closing these gaps to improve the quality of services. These prescriptions are: first is knowledge means to learn what customers expect. Second is setting standards that reflect expectations. Third is to deliver as per expectations. Fourth is strong internal communication. Fifth is educate customers to see reality of service delivery to make right perceptions. The last is to make sure that the service message is clear and unambiguous, referred as interpretation.